Hello, and welcome to Right Here, Right Queer. I'm RK Ashwick, your host for today, and I'm here with SL Rowland, author of Cursed Cocktails, and I think maybe a billion other books. You are extremely prolific, sir. I'm so excited to have you here.
Oh, thanks. I'm happy to join. I don't know if I would consider myself prolific. I mean, I have 14 books out, but I'm steady. So I've been at it since 2017. So they just add up after a while. I think I'm actually a pretty slow writer.
Steady, I think, is a good word for it. Yeah. I still think that's amazing to have 14 books out and to just have built like both a lit RPG community and a cozy fantasy community. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So to kick us off, which of your books are you most excited to talk about today and why?
That's always a tough one. I feel like each of my books brings a little something different to the table. But if I had to pick one, it would probably be Cursed Cocktails because it's the one that really kind of changed the trajectory of my career and brought me into the cozy space.
Yeah, it's really like kind of exploded, which I absolutely loved because it's a fantastic book. You've got Cursed Cocktails, and then you have, I don't know if you would call them like companion novels because they're following other characters, but you've got Sword and Thistle, and you've got The Halfling's Harvest, and then I believe you have another one coming out this fall. I was going to ask, how much did you know about the series when you set out to kind of pivot into cozy fantasy? Like, were you just going like, I'm just going to write Cursed Cocktails, and then did it spiral from there, or did you have a whole series in mind?
Basically, I knew I wanted to write Cursed Cocktails. Like, I was writing it totally just as a passion project because I had read Legends and Lattes and just fell in love with it. And I liked the idea of the retired hero and, starting over later in life. And so with that in mind, I was actually working on, I think it was book 5 of my 6-book LitRPG series, Sentenced to Troll, when I had the idea for Cursed Cocktails. And so for several months, the idea was just kind of stewing in the back of my mind and the world building, and I was doing all that, but I hadn't actually written anything. So by the time I'd finished that book and started on Cursed Cocktails, I had kind of an entire world mapped out, and the story really it flowed so well. Like, probably one of the easiest books I've ever written, and it had a lot of personal inspiration, especially with the blood mage who is suffering from chronic pain, and I have an autoimmune disease myself, so I was able to bring some elements of that across. And at the time, I only had plans for Cursed Cocktails. I didn't really know what to expect, how it would be received. And then once I finally published it, it quickly became my bestseller. And the reception was vastly different from anything that I had experienced writing LitRPG. I got a lot of messages from people telling me how they related to the characters, how important the story was for them, how it was just such a comforting read that they kept going back to. And I don't know, I guess I kind of just felt like I had found a new lane for myself and decided I wanted to keep going with that.
That's amazing. I really love that. I also love that it was an easy book for you to write because I feel like that's so often not the case. It feels like that pivot was just kind of like a breath of fresh air for you in pivoting from lit RPG to cozy fantasy, which is awesome. I happen to see on your website that you have special editions now. Like, that's amazing.
Yes.
They're so freaking pretty.
We just launched a special edition Kickstarter a couple months ago for Cursed Cocktails, Sword and Thistle, and The Halfling's Harvest. These are like the faux leather with the foil stamping, and I think it's like 8 to 10 illustrations in each one with gilded edges, and really just like as premium as you can make a book is what I set out to do with these. And then I think sometime in November we'll be opening the late backer store for people who missed out. But right now we're doing all the formatting and everything. Hopefully we'll get these printed sometime in early spring, and then I'll do one for There Be Dragons Here afterwards.
So many things to look forward to. You're living the dream, man. So cool.
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky, I feel like.
You mentioned a little bit about readers really being drawn to these characters and finding them relatable and finding them comforting. Do you have a favorite character you've created And that doesn't have to be from Curse Cocktails, but it can if you want.
I really do like Rowland. Like, he's the main character of Curse Cocktails, and there's a lot of myself in him, but also, I don't know, something about him just, he's so powerful, and he spent his entire life fighting monsters in the frozen north to protect the realm. And in spite of like all the terrible things that he's seen, he still has such a very kind heart. And, I think that in more epic fantasy, that's a very rare thing. People get kind of jaded and grizzled and a hardened exterior by the things that they see. But for him to still be that kind and understanding person, it was a lot of fun to write. But I would say Dobbin from Sword and Thistle is probably in the top two. In the Marvel movies, they have created what's called this anchor being that ties all the universes together. And I feel like he has kind of become that of my Tales of Adria universe. Because he just appeared, randomly in a scene in Cursed Cocktails, and he refused to leave, so he got his own book, and he pops up a little bit in the Halfling's Harvest bonus epilogue. And I just feel like he's kind of that grumpy, veteran adventurer who's seen a lot, and it's he likes to be left alone, but he still has a heart of gold on the inside.
I like how you say that he likes to be left alone, and yet he won't leave you alone. And he's like, no, I'm just here in your whole series now.
Yeah, pretty much.
I love that. Characters like that are so fun. So my next question, we already talked a little bit about what drew you to your subgenres, going from lit RPG to cozy fantasy. So you've kind of proven that you can be successful in multiple subgenres. Just out of curiosity, does that open up any other subgenres that you're kind of eyeing or thinking of? Or are you pretty content to continue in both lit RPG and cozy fantasy for now?
I have plans to branch out in the future. So one thing that I like about the world of Tales of Adria is that, I made this sprawling, epic-sized world. There's 7 kingdoms, there's all these different races and secret societies, gods, and so much world-building potential there that I can use in other aspects of storytelling. I want to do a grimdark story that's set in the same world.
Ooh, okay.
So that you can see kind of, how this world has evolved. Nestled away in all of my world building is folders that I have on my desktop is 5 different ages of how this world has evolved. And the Tales of Adria stories, they fall in the latest age where things are all nice and cozy, and most of the troubles in the world have been resolved, but that wasn't always the case. And I think it'll be fun to explore some of those darker moments. I wouldn't mind doing an epic fantasy trilogy, or who knows what might pop up. But I think there's a lot of room to explore this world and connect these stories in different ways and bring readers in from different avenues that might find something new that they would like.
Yeah, I mean, when you've done that much world building, you've kind of made a whole playground for yourself. So yeah, that's very cool that you can just kind of take full advantage of that and not worry about being stuck to one subgenre. I think that's awesome. We already mentioned Legends and Lattes, kind of inspiring you to pivot into something like Cursed Cocktails. What other stories inspire you?
My biggest influence is probably The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I read those when I was in high school, and it was the same time that I think the Fellowship of the Ring was coming out. So it just kind of influenced me a lot at that age and really drew me into the, more epic fantasy. And also I would say Dungeons and Dragons and things of that nature, video games, have played a big role in influencing my world building. I really enjoy creating monsters and magic and seeing, what I can include in my story that still feels natural without, being just a distracting element.
Now, I promise not to completely derail us, but asking about video games, do you find yourself often playing solo narrative-based games like Dragon Age and Elden Ring? When you said creative monsters, it made me think of Elden Ring.
Yeah, I tried Elden Ring and it kicked my butt.
Yeah, that's fair.
I can't handle the Souls games or whatever they're called.
Souls-like?
Yeah, they're tough. I did play a lot of RPGs when I was younger, like The Legend of Dragoon, played a little Final Fantasy here and there. Mostly, around the time that I was in college, I got hooked on League of Legends, and that took up my life for way too many years. I finally had to just uninstall it when I decided I wanted to try my hand at writing a novel. But I really liked, even though it's just, it's a 5v5 PvP type game, like they created such a rich world with their characters and the lore that I was really drawn to that.
Yeah, I feel like when they were really expanding League of Legends, they had like side stories that you could read and just a bunch of other like ancillary content that eventually expanded into Arcane, the TV show, which is extremely cool. I mean, talk about, hopping between like subgenres.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal show.
Oh, for sure. So what are some themes that you like to explore and or revisit in your writing? And I imagine the themes might differ between what you explore in LitRPG versus what you explore in cozy fantasy. Or maybe they're more similar than I'm expecting. I don't know.
There are some similarities. Like found family is something that has been pretty steadfast across like all of my stories. The main characters always, find themselves surrounded by people who become more and more important to them. And I think that's kind of a universal theme throughout most of what I write. But, lit RPG tends to be a lot more action and adventure. But the world building, I think part of the reason my cozy fantasies have such deep world building is because I started writing with LitRPG. That kind of aspect just translated over. That is one of the things that readers often comment about my cozy stuff, is that the world building is deep and it often connects one book to the other, even if it's like a small little, section of the city or a tiny little note on a monster or something. But for some of my favorite themes, I would say the retired hero is probably at the top of the list. I just think there's something so cool about, this like badass adventurer who, they spent their whole life doing one thing and, now they get to start over and do something where their entire skill set from before is no longer relevant. And they're starting over, they're learning a new task or new skill at the same time as they are essentially learning to be a new person. I also really enjoy including animal companions in my books. I'm a huge pet lover, so there's always one or two that make their way into the story.
I love that. Yeah, the theme of like self-identity and who you are without a certain skill set and like moving on from a career that you used to have. That's we saw that in Legends and Lattes. I believe Z.S. Diamante also did it in Garden the Garden. It's about a soldier who gets injured and can no longer be in the career that, he has dedicated his whole life to. And you know what? It's also in Recipes for an Unexpected Afterlife, which is also about kind of a retired, knight who ends up opening up a restaurant. So yeah, very, very compelling and very common in cozy fantasy.
Yeah, I've read both of those. They are great reads.
Oh yeah, no, they're all fantastic reads. So you mentioned a little bit about having to uninstall League of Legends when pivoting to writing novels. What motivated you to start writing? What kind of drove that storytelling urge?
I think I always had a desire to be a writer. What I didn't always have was the motivation and the discipline to sit down and write. When I went to college, my degree was in English. I got a minor in secondary education because I thought I was going to be a teacher. And I graduated. I did my semester of student teaching and it went fine, but I was just like, this really isn't what I want to do. And so I spent the next 10 years waiting tables. I would do some writing here and there, but I never really just took it seriously. And then I guess at some point, I think around 27 or 28, I was like, I just need to buckle down and see if it's actually something that I can do. And so my first novel, which is actually, it's not published, but it was a post-apocalyptic zombie fiction. And I took a month off from my job and I sat down and I wrote it. And probably not very good, but it did prove to me that I could finish a novel. And, after that, I spent a lot of time reading and researching and eventually had a better idea and understanding and put out something that was somewhat readable.
That's amazing that you were like, no, I'm just gonna commit to it and see if I can do it. And clearly you've proven that you absolutely can.
Yeah, it's been a learning process, I would say. I look back at some of my earlier work and I do cringe a little. And I'm like, there's so many ways that I could have just written this better or gotten this point across. You always just have to keep moving forward. And even though I look back back and like cringe at some of those books. You know, there are some people who say that those are their favorite books I've written, so I guess they can't be all bad.
No, of course not. I feel like, yeah, looking back on your old writing and cringing, that just comes with the territory. And you just have to, I guess, not do it too often. Not look back too often, I guess.
Yeah.
What do you hope to accomplish with your stories? And what do you want your readers to take away from your books?
The number one thing I want to accomplish with my stories is, you know, for them to be entertaining. Because when I read, majority of the time, I'm reading to escape and I'm reading to be entertained. And if my books can't do that, then, you know, I don't really see what is the point in writing something that's going to be a slog for someone to get through. But I think that, like, beyond that, especially with my cozy fantasy, I think it's important to be, you know, a comforting place that people can escape to. That they know no matter what happens in the middle, that these stories will have a happy ending and everything will be okay. So I think generally in most of my books, I do touch on some tougher subjects. Like, you know, Cursed Cocktails deals with chronic pain. Sword and Thistle has a main character who is, you know, dealing with grief from losing one of his friends in an adventure gone wrong. The Halfling's Harvest is about, you know, someone who is trying to step out of their father's shadow and find their place in the world. And, you know, I think you can mix these kind of deeper topics with cozy fantasy and, you know, use that cozy aesthetic to really let you explore tougher topics without it overtaking the story.
Yeah, I was literally going to say the same thing about cozy fantasy, how nice it is that you know, even though it can be low stakes, it doesn't have to be like scrubbed clean of things like grief and angst and self-identity and all of those things that people still relate to and struggle with in real life. But it's easier to kind of process and explore when couched in that like subgenre, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it depends on who you ask. You know, some people want nothing but like sweet, happy, feel-good moments, but I do enjoy experiencing other emotions while I'm reading cozy fantasy. It's usually, you know, like a wave where you know, everything's cozy, then you have a little tension, then cozy again. And I think that's kind of how I most enjoy it.
Same. I'm the exact same way, both in terms of what I want to read and what I want to write. There's got to be that tension and emotion there. Right, kitty cat? Sorry, my kitty cat is sitting right next to the computer, and I have been fighting with her this whole time, trying to get her not to sit on the keyboard. So we talked a little bit about how hard it is to finish a novel, and we talked about, you know, maybe not cringing too much at our old work just in order to keep moving forward. Do you have any other advice for aspiring authors?
Some of the advice that kind of helped me the most when I was starting out and even now is read a lot in the genres that you want to write so that you understand like what it is that the readers enjoy, how to give them, you know, a story that they will enjoy. And also, you know, write a lot. Even if you think it's not good, you know, you're not gonna get better unless you put in the work to practice. I think I read somewhere it's like, you know, your first 1,000,000 words are probably not gonna be very good. And I think I'm getting close to crossing that 1,000,000 word mark at this point. So who knows what's in store. But, you know, I think just keep at it. If it's something that you're passionate about, nothing happens overnight. I think there's a saying that's like, you know, every overnight sensation took 10 years to get there. So keep working, keep reading, and don't be afraid to ask questions or, you know, connect with other authors. Going to conventions and events is like a great way to meet other authors and, you know, learn from them. Every author probably has something that they could tell you that you wouldn't think of. So it really never hurts to just talk to people and listen to their process and, you know, how they view writing.
Yeah, I mean, writing is it's just you and the computer or typewriter or journal, however you write. It can be very lonely. So I think it's really important to find other people who are into the same things you are, just for, you know, support and a sense of community, and absolutely, you know, asking advice and kind of seeing how other people all handle the same kind of business.
Yeah, it's definitely an isolating profession. So it really helps to like have a community and other people to connect with at some point.
Yeah. And finally, where can readers find you and your work if they want to dive into LitRPG or Cozy Fantasy with Cursed Cocktails, or if they want to check out There Be Dragons Here?
So my website is slrowland.com. You can usually find most of my links over there. I do have an online shop as well where you can get some of my audiobooks as well as signed copies. For ebooks, I'm still exclusive with Amazon right now, though you can find my ebooks in libraries now as of like about a month ago. And There Be Dragons Here is currently on pre-order for the ebook, but I'm hoping I've got about maybe like 10,000 more words to write on this one, and then I can start edits. So, hopefully 2 to 3 months from now, that one will be ready to send out into the world.
That's awesome. Well, best of luck with that last 10,000 words.
Thank you. Those are always the hardest.
Yeah, for sure. And you can find Right Here, Right Queer on Instagram at Right Here, Right Queer Podcast. And that's all I got. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.